All right, I think we're recording. So I apologize about that. I don't know what happened. I had to force close it. Um, okay. So if you remember, we ended with this um, slide, and I kind of want to go over it one more time. Is these are pretty much on the top. We're dealing with our competencies, so our personal self competencies, and then our social competencies. And then on the red side, we have our ability to recognize both ourself and others. And then how do we regulate those emotions and whatnot that are presented both in ourself and in others. So in the recognition, we talked about how we need a superior level, and I'll put it that way, of self and emotional awareness. And also something called self-confidence. Now, the way this works is one, that awareness that we have of ourself is important in that um, uh, we need to have a truthful understanding of our emotions and our feelings. And we'll go over how to improve those here in a minute. And when we get to counseling skills, this topic is going to come up again um, when we start looking at things like biases and those kinds of things. So we have to have this high level of emotional and self-awareness and an accurate self-assessment of our situation. And a lot of times we may be overconfident in our ability to understand our own emotional state. And that overconfidence can lead to an inaccurate assessment of our feelings, emotions, and behaviors. So then we have to have self-confidence. Okay, this is our ability to express our own emotions and know that we can regulate them as we need them. Okay. And then within social awareness, we talked about the use of empathy. And I do want to be clear of empathy because there is a good component, but there's also a dark side of empathy. Okay. And they're not always talked about very well in the literature. Okay. When we measure behavior, okay, meaning we see someone in distress, what does someone do? We have found that people who measure high in empathy actually have escape behaviors. They want to avoid the situation. When a person measures low in empathy, they go right into the danger point. They go right into the situation. Okay. And you might be asking, well, why? It seems like people who are high in empathy are more likely to engage in pro-social behavior. Okay. And again, this is the dark side. When we have empathy versus compassion, empathy is feeling all of the emotions of that other person and understanding their emotional state. Okay. When someone is in distress, that person wants to escape that distress. They want it to end. So if they're having a heart attack, they want the heart attack to stop. If they were just robbed or something like that, they just want things to go back to the way they were and be out of that danger. Okay. Well, if you think about someone high in empathy, they are feeling all of those emotions of that individual. And so their instant impulse is to escape and get out of that current situation. Okay. Now, with that being said, and you can so low in empathy. If you've ever experienced a police officer that just really doesn't care or doesn't feel your emotions, or a emergency response person, a nurse in an ER, I think we've all experienced those individuals within those settings. Well, a lot of low empathy people go into those fields because they are not feeling the trauma that is going on with the people they're trying to help. And so, in some ways, it does make them more effective in those emergency situations. Okay. But within our field, whether you're going into social work, counseling, the addiction field, empathy can help. And having the right type of empathy, in that we want to feel what our clients are feeling, and we want to be understanding to them. Okay. And this is why this just isn't listed as empathy. It's more about coming to an understanding of their emotional state by feeling that emotional state, and then trying to find a balance between our confidence and whatnot, and our own what we're experiencing and what that individual needs. Okay. So just kind of keep this in mind. There's a dark and a good side of empathy. And what we want to leverage when it comes to emotional intelligence is the positive side of being empathetic. Okay. Competencies such as wanting to develop other people. A lot about this class is how do we get a person from addiction into sobriety, for example. And understanding those things of wanting to help a person become better than they are today, or whatever is troubling them. And then, of course, this also leads to a service orientation, that we want to be a service to our community, and we want to add to our community setting. Okay. And then leveraging diversity. And I want to state this in the kind of some of the experiences professional has in Native American communities, because in a lot of Native American communities, especially non-natives, don't leverage the diversity within that community. And they get stuck doing this Western version of treatment that sometimes is not effective within that setting. I always think of there was uh, um, all good intentions and everything, but a group of Western counselors went to a community in Africa, that there seemed to be a lot of individuals who were depressed and those types of things. And within a couple weeks, the leaders of the tribe kicked the counselors out. And when they went to kind of say, well, why don't you want them there? The chief, or the leader of the group, said, well, we found it strange that we have a sad and depressed member of our community. And what they're doing is they're taking them into a enclosed place with only one person, and they're sitting there and they just talk for an hour, and then they leave. And he basically said, how can you heal without your community? How could you heal without feeling the earth and the sun and being within nature? It just doesn't seem rational to us that what those Western counselors were doing would have any effectiveness on our people. And this is what's meant by leveraging diversity, is understanding that, yes, in your education, you'll go through the Western standards of counseling and therapy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's effective for a given community. And making sure you go in and have all the tools to leverage the diversity within that community. Okay. And then, of course, the last one is organizational awareness, understanding where our position is within our organization and why we are there. And so that's the other component. So once we have these are our competencies of recognition. Our competencies of regulation are things like self-control and not going with our first impulse, or we're driven by our emotional state. Trustworthiness, that you do what you say you're going to do. And I will say that working with, for example, individuals who've gone through trauma, and if that's who you want to work with, this is a huge thing for them. The moment they lose your trust, they're going to be very difficult to get them to come back. Conscientiousness, so this is thinking of the needs of others. Excuse me. And then adaptability, not having such a closed self that you can't be open to different ideas and different concepts and different ways of being. And then the last one is innovation. Innovation in how do you create two people who have two different emotional states, if they're highly aroused, how do you kind of break that cycle between those individuals? And that's being innovative within the situation. And then on the social competency end, it's being able to be, of course, an effective communicator, which we will talk about as we go through the counseling skills. It means that you're good with conflict management. How do you reduce the arguments between, especially in the group setting? And again, we'll go over that when we're going to going through counseling, the counseling skills. Change catalyst. Okay, and this is something that you'll notice in the social services field broadly, whether it's social work, counseling, advocacy, or whatnot, is most individuals go into that wanting to change people for the better. Don't get me wrong on that, that I want to change lives. I want to change individuals. And they get into the field, and about 3 or 4 years, I always say you hit this wall. And you hit this wall because the success rates within our field are very, very low. Okay. You probably have heard that cognitive behavioral therapy is one of our most effective treatment modalities. And some of you have mentioned that you use that within your work settings as well. And it's the most evidence-based treatment that we have. While its effectiveness is about 17%, okay? Meaning that less than 1 in 20 people, 1 in 10 people, what am I thinking of this? 17, 1 in 10, less than 1 in 5 people are being affected by that cognitive behavioral therapy, okay? You have probably heard, working in family violence and domestic violence, that the average victim goes back to their abuser 7 to 10 times. If you work within the correction system, recidivism rates are around 60%. If we look at recovery from addiction, it's very low, okay? And so we hit this 3 to 4 year wall, and we're like, I'm not creating the change that I expected to do. I'm not making all the lives better that I wanted to make better. The communities aren't, they're progressing, but they're not progressing like I had hoped, okay? And this is where individuals either, there's really kind of three things, and there's more, but there's about three. One, they quit. They go do something else. You have probably heard that about, I think it's a little bit above 85% of individuals who have bachelors in social work don't use that degree, meaning that less than 15% of individuals with bachelors in social work stay in the field and work in that area of social work. Okay. And so there's individuals who just say, I'm done with this, I quit, I'm done. But then there are the other route, and some of you have maybe met these individuals. You go to the welfare office or the place, and there's the grumpiest person in the world sitting there, and they're taking your information, and they're very offish. I'm willing to bet we've all met this person, whether it be in the medical field or working within social services. And they're the ones that just kind of give up because they need the paycheck. Okay. The other portion of the group that I hope all of you become is coming to the realization that we don't change anyone. We don't have that power. Okay. What we can do is seed the possibilities of change. We can put that catalyst that might ignite that person to create change within themselves. And so, when you get to that perspective, you actually enjoy working in this field much more because you know that you did what you needed to do. Okay. When I was working in the corrections field and I was doing counselors with first-time offenders, I always kind of said, okay, this time is on us. And so through the correction system, we gave them all the programming we could, GED programs, relapse prevention programs, trauma programs. And so we knew that they were going to leave that prison system with all the knowledge they needed in order to change their life. Okay. And so I always said this time is on us. We got to make sure that people have the skills they need. We're just being the catalyst. We're trying to ignite it. But the second time and the third time when a person comes through, then it's on them because we did our job. And the only thing we can do is remind them of the skills that we helped them develop the first and second and sometimes third time. So that's how so I'm just going to point this out. One, it will make your job much happier. And two, it really lifts your emotional intelligence when you know that you don't have to be the responsible one if someone doesn't change their life. You're just there to seed that change. Okay. The last one is building bonds, building relationships with each other. And, I want to be clear about this. When we say building bonds, okay, meaning that we link with other individuals, but we also maintain boundaries, right? And I can talk about this within the addiction field, and I can talk about this within the trauma and abuse field. When you model bonds, when you model boundaries between two individuals, that is just like trustworthiness is with trauma. Uh, People will come back to you when they feel like you're connected, but you also maintain these very rigid boundaries. Rigid in that you're a service provider and you're not their best friend or who's going to go for a drink after work with, those types of things. You're not going to go home to your clients. Okay. I had a story on that one too. What was it? I will say this, working in the correction system and not having those boundaries and stuff can be really harmful. I had a colleague once that, interestingly, she ended up in the facility that she worked in because she became so emotionally connected with the inmates that she was treating that the inmates manipulated her into bringing things to them from the outside that they weren't supposed to have. Um, and eventually she was actually caught and convicted of doing that. And so we have to remember that our clients are human beings too, and they might have their own agenda. And if you don't have healthy boundaries, they can use that in manipulative ways. So kind of be aware of that as you move forward, especially with populations that you're working with. Collaboration and cooperation, these are really big for the group setting, and so is team capabilities and building those connections and us working together, that we're here. We have that identity piece. And then, of course, influence and leadership. Leadership being that you're leading, you're not pushing. As I see a lot of memes on Facebook, a leader is someone who is in the group, um, bringing people along and bringing people up, versus individuals who are not good leaders. They're at the back whipping the employees or whatever it may be, and that's not effective. Okay. So these are the things, again, I know we briefly went over them on just before fall break, but I wanted to bring these up now that you've gone through and looked at your own areas of emotional intelligence. Okay. And this is the comedy we left with. And again, the purpose of emotional intelligence is to help individuals to strive, success in living, working, learning, and social interactions with self and others. And I will tell you, if you build these skills, not only can you make your clients go into a state of thriving versus surviving, you also will go into striving instead of surviving. And the two difference between those, the person who is striving gets up each day and they want to do what they need to do, while someone who is surviving is just kind of getting from day to day. Okay. And we've already gone over this. This is just a different way. So if you want to come back to this presentation, you can look at it in the different areas that we talked about. In this, we have self-regulation, emotional self-awareness, like we talked about, and then we have empathy, and those types of things. So this is just another way you can think about what's that emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. So it gives a little bit more detailed descriptors. So we're at that point. What should we do in developing our emotional intelligence? How should we go about um, uh, uh, improving these things? Okay. And these tend to be the top 7, I think there are, in increasing your emotional intelligence. And I encourage you to write these down or have them somewhere. And the first one is listen to yourself and listen to your emotions. Okay. In the scientific field, if you ever read in science about emotions and feelings, we separate emotions from feelings. And I'm just going to put an F and an E here. Okay. And in the field, what an emotion represents is a physiological reaction to our environment. It's a physiological reaction that tells us there's something right or there's something wrong going on in our environment. It's kind of like our alarm system. Okay. Our feelings, on the other hand, are our cognitive appraisal of our emotions. They are our memories of emotions. They are the labels we give emotions. Okay. So they are that thing, when we mention something like, I'm sad. Okay. The emotion is the physiological reaction. A lot of people who are sad, they can kind of feel that gut, and there's this sad feeling that just kind of envelops the heart. And you just get this physiological reaction of just not wanting to be there because you're sad. And then then of course the feeling is the label of that emotion. Okay. Now, this is kind of the difficult part and why it's important to start listening to yourself and your emotions and how you're identifying. We should maybe cluster these together and identifying and classifying emotions. Okay. Because we're not always accurate on labeling our emotional state. Okay. And I may have used this example in this class. I'm not sure. I might be thinking of another class. But an example of this is children who have been abused, adults who have been abused as young children, whether it be physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or neglect. Okay. Because because what we use to determine what the emotion of love is, okay, is we use an archetype that exists in our world. And what's the main archetype that represents love? It's usually our mother. And and in some cases, the research is kind of shaky on this because most of it has been done with the mother and child. There is a growing amount of evidence that yes, dad does represent love. It's kind of a different kind of love, but it's love. We are finding that moms tend to provide unconditioned love, and dads tend to provide conditioned love based on the child's abilities and what they're doing. Now, I've digressed a little bit, but I want to get to the point about feelings and emotions. So this is what represents love. Let's just say this little square. But if this square is hitting us, sexually taking advantage of us, doesn't take us to school consistently, we move all the time, they hurt us a lot, okay? The emotion of love, which I'll put an L right now, is pain. The feeling, the emotion of pain. That's literally what we're feeling. But we give that pain the label of love, that this is what love must be, is pain, okay? Because we've made that mislabel, when we get older in life and whatnot, this is why some individuals who have been abused, some, not all, I want to make that very clear, some individuals tend to end up getting in chronically bad relationships. These are the individuals that tend to go for the bad boy or the person who will end up being abusive, okay? Because of this mislabeling between a feeling and emotion, okay? And this is the one thing that we need to do very critically when we're developing our emotional intelligence is when I have an emotion, is my interpretation of that emotion accurate? Is there evidence that this emotion means this? Or do I need to rethink that emotional state given the situation, the people who are there, and whatnot? Okay. And so this is a difficult process, and I'll be honest with you, this is a lifelong process. It's hard to break these labels that we provide emotions when they're inaccurate. It's not just something that you write on a list. This is when I experience this physically, I think of it this way and I go, okay, do these match? Oh no, so I need to change my mind. That's an oversimplification of this process. Okay. And then the next part is noting the difference between having and acting on an emotion. Okay. And this really comes down to the issue of temperament. All right. And the difficult part about this is temperament, whether we react very quickly or we react kind of slowly. So we have hot heads versus the laid back person, where everything kind of falls off there and they always seem just fine, or the person who instantly reacts with anger or something like that. Okay. The difficult about breaking this chain of reactivity is that it is one of the very few personality features, personality components that is pretty much totally biologically based. Okay. Your other personalities, whether you're extroverted, introverted, neurotic, open, closed, all of those are about 20 to 60% genetically based. But temperament is pretty much, I'm not going to put 100%, but it's like in the upper 90% that it's inherited by your parents. Okay. And so for some of us that are kind of on the kind of laid back part, we have to assess this in, is this a situation that I should be reacting to quickly? Okay. Because for a lot of people who are laid back, the reaction isn't quick enough. The act on that emotion's not always quick. And so you're always being told, well, why don't you do more of this or that? Or why did you not, take care of little Billy's boo-boo when he got it? Those kind of things. And then on the other side, when we have a quick reactivity, it's about slowing down our emotional response and saying, I don't need to act on this emotion in this situation. So I would encourage you to look at your temperament and look at where you are and decide when you're interpreting whether I should just have this emotion and let it go, or if I should act on it and be a part of it. Really look at your temperament. Okay. Um, the other part of this is that one thing that research has shown is that on the physiological end, emotions are what we call situationally bound. Okay. What does that mean? Our physiological response stops once we're out of that given situation. Okay. But what often can happen is our feelings can transcend the situation. So we get out of that and we ruminate about what I should have done different. What should have I? And then we start to get upset or angry again. Okay. Well, understanding that it's the situation and that situations don't transcend time is makes it so that you can more easily say, okay, in that situation, this happened, but I don't have to carry that emotion with me. I don't have to keep that emotion fire going. Okay. And that will give you a more accurate interpretation of the situation. Learn to distract. um, in any given situation, we know we're reactive to certain things. And that sometimes the situation doesn't demand for us to be reacting. Um, and so learning distraction skills is an important step to emotional regulation. One area we can see this in, if we want to take um, an example from the treatment area, is, for example, children with autism. One thing that you'll learn as you go through, if you've taken the abnormal class or anything with mental health, is autism is a social disorder. Um, and what the current theory is that children with autism don't have the filters that non-autistic people have. What do I mean by filters? Is people who are non-autistic can weed out the stimulus that we don't need to be paying attention to. And we can just do, we can do without certain things, and we can focus on what we need to focus on. Children, especially with severe autism, and this, the theory, if you want to look it up, is the overwhelming hypothesis, is that we're finding with more neurological evidence that children with autism are missing these filters. And so they're getting so much stimulation. When I was originally was learning about this, the presenter imagine 24/7 a week, and this is someone with severe autism, that you're hearing rock and roll in one ear and country music in another ear, and then maybe classical music is coming to you, and there's lights everywhere, maybe strobe lights that are constantly going off, and you can't get rid of all that stimuli, but it's constantly coming out of you. This is what they call the world of the autistic child. But how do children that maybe we should learn from deal with this overstimulation? Well, they do it through distractions. Okay, this is why some children with autism become very particular about what cars are in the order there should be, toy cars, times that they should be doing something. They're very time restrictive, and when mom is late picking them up, they tend to go into distress, for example, and they have to have a very fixed and rigid routine. Okay. What are they doing? Well, they're distracting from the overwhelming stimuli, the social stimuli that they're receiving. Okay. Um, and another example is people with anxiety. Okay. Anxiety is when a disorder has taken over our emotional arousal system. Um, and we are constantly feeling this fear or this worry about something going on in our world. It's really just, it's hijacked that system. Okay. One common distraction, I should say, it's not the complete treatment, is if you've ever noticed someone flipping a rubber band on their wrist. Okay. That distraction of flipping that rubber band distracts the individuals from their anxious thought rumination and anxious thoughts, that because they're feeling that physical sensation and they're doing it in a repetitive action. Okay. Why do I bring this up? Because there's a lot of things that people who have disorders do that we really should learn from and really understand why they do that. And then in high emotional situations, we should probably do what they're doing instead of the reactions that we often give or we often do. Okay. Take time to note your impact on others. Uh, and this is something simple that you could do with your phone. You could have a little notepad, and whenever you come into a situation and different emotions, you write down the emotions, and then you write down the results of that conversation, and you go back and you take a look at the impact that you had, whether positive or negative. And this goes back to an honest evaluation. Okay. Set goals internally or written. And I'll tell you why you got to do it based on your how you work. Okay. Um, I I'm really bad at finishing something that is written down. If I write down a goal, to me, it's done. I've completed it because it's written down. But when I'm successful at goals is when I internalize it and I make it a thought process and whatnot. So this is what's meant by internally or written. What works best for you when you set goals? And you probably have heard the note, don't you can have those grand goals, but when it says set goals, we're talking about today. We're talking about this week. We're not talking about when you'll graduate from college down the road, or when you purchase a house down the road, or when you finally get through recovery. Okay. What we're saying is right here, you can note it right here. Slow down, think, and act. The goals should be immediate goals. What am I going to accomplish today? What am I going to accomplish this week? And then, of course, the last thing in developing your emotional intelligence is slow down, think, then act. Okay. One of the mistakes we commonly make is that we react on our emotion. We don't slow down, think, and act. And another good real world example of this is the majority of homicides in the United States happen within families. If we look at, the majority, usually women with their spouse or two family members having a conflict. Okay. And you probably have heard this idea of what's called crime of passion, where the person became so emotionally aroused that that's what caused them to act violently on the individual, on the family member. Okay. And this is what this is trying to say, is don't instantly react on your emotions. When you're feeling highly emotion, practice slowing down, stepping away, thinking about it, and then acting upon it. Okay. Another probably good example we get in the treatment setting is couples therapy. One of the first things that couple therapists teach their clients, usually, not always, but usually, is that when you start getting in an argument and emotions start to come up, all right, and they're very intense emotions, make the agreement that when that happens, you're going to separate. Maybe he'll go to the garage, and she will go for a jog, something like that, or they agree that they'll go to these spots and do something physical for about 15 minutes and then come back and talk again. And so there's this 15, 10, 15 kind of play with this. Because often when you're in a intense situation, our instant reactions are not always the best. Maybe one of my best work examples is when I get upset with a something that was told about me, a negative evaluation or something like that. I'll go and I'll instantly write the email that I'm going to send, and I'm going to make sure they know how I feel and the rationale behind it. But what I've learned to do is write the email, but I don't send it until the next day. Because when I come back and I analyze it the next day, I recognize that there were fallacies in my thoughts and emotions because and emotions are not rational. All right. And I say a lot of things when I'm in the moment of emotions. I've had to learn, especially with emails and stuff like that. If it's highly emotion, write the email, stop, come back to it the next day and reevaluate. And so that's kind of an example of slow down, think, then act. Okay. All right, so those are some strategies for developing emotional intelligence. And so I do want to kind of go through a preview of the things that we'll be talking about or start to talk about this Wednesday. Is we're going to start by talking more in depth about attending. You probably heard at the beginning of the semester, we kind of went over a summary of attending. And what is it? And how do we increase this ability? So we're going to come back to things like eye contact, body language. We're going to talk about rapport building. And rapport building is going to become very important because it's the first step in resolving any future conflicts that come up, especially in the group setting. Is if you have a good rapport with all of your group members, that goes a long way to resolve conflict. But also, it's skill development for your group members. So you're modeling a behavior of building rapport and respect among your group members. And so we'll get into that. You'll see there's quite a bit in this section. And then the last one, and I'll make it so I give you some silence here in just a minute. The last thing, the other thing, not the last, the third concept that we'll get through Wednesday and the following week is the concept of silence. For a lot of people, silence is very uncomfortable. Research on teachers after they ask a question, how long does a teacher wait until they just kind of give students the answers? The answer is actually 2 to 3 seconds. The average instructor and teacher gives a student about 3 seconds to provide an answer. The problem with that is it takes us about 10 seconds to even understand most questions and the response we should be given. It takes up to 20 seconds to actually develop what we want to say. Okay. And so we're going to talk about silence and the skills of silence. And I'll tell you, one of the tricks that I used to do when I was developing this is I'd ask a client a question and I would mentally count to 20 before I encourage them to think some more about the question that I asked. But we're going to talk about this and how it benefits you as the counselor, but it also benefits your client that you're working with. And then I'll leave the rest. We have quite a few after this to go through, but these are the 3 topics that we're going to really focus on over the next couple weeks. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording.